Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how
He's alive!
Welcome to Where the Weird Ones Are.
Every time I speak, I want the truth to come out.
Powerful figures in Hollywood as well as powerful politicians who are in fact not human. They're reptiles or they're lizards or perhaps extraterrestrials.
I don't think it is a human. I think it's a Sasquatch.
Go ahead and run. Run home and cry to mama.
Let's get weird.
What's up, you fucking weirdos? Welcome to another episode of Where the Weird Ones Are. My name is Kevin, but you probably already knew that, and if you didn't, now you do. Today's episode is with a gentleman by the name of Mark Steeves. He hails from Connecticut, so he is a fellow New Englander. Although Connecticut is the armpit of New England, and New England tends to disown Connecticut. But, you know, that's besides the point. But Mark lives there, and Mark's a pretty great dude, so Connecticut can't be all that bad, you know? Mark comes on today, and we talk about Atlantis, Bermuda Triangle, energy weapons, lizard people, Native American structures, you know, just all around weird stuff. So Mark is the host of the podcast My Family Thinks I'm Crazy, because he would try to have these kinds of conversations with his family, and his family would be like, hey man, you're fucking crazy. So he had a hard time finding people to talk about these things, and the podcast gave him that avenue to do so. He's been doing it for a few years now. I think he's approaching 400 episodes within the next couple of weeks, maybe. I could be wrong. I might be incorrect on that, so don't quote me. But yeah, he's a very articulate dude. It seems like it takes no effort for him to, to think as he's speaking, and it translates really well. And you'll see that once the show gets going, and you're listening to him speak. But Mark is also the booker for my favorite podcast. It's been my favorite for the last couple of years, other than Joe Rogan. So Mark's the booker for Tinfoil Hat with Sam Tripoli, and I love that show. The guests are always amazing, so obviously Mark is doing a fantastic job with finding these guests, so I commend him for that. And yeah, so if you guys enjoy today's episode, I really hope you do. I hope you check out his stuff, and you like, follow, share, and subscribe, and leave me a rating and a review. That is like the number one best way to help this show grow. Not that I need it to grow, but it'd be cool if it does. What else, man? You can get some merch if you want some merch. Go ahead and head on over to wheretheweirdonесarepodcast.com. You can get to the merch store through there. The blog is there. There's a gallery of people wearing the merch. The chat room that is password protected is on there. So if you want access to the chat room, you got to be a Patreon member. The Patreon is up. So far, we only got one Conspiracy Tuesday on there, but there will be a story time coming up next week. And then there'll be more Conspiracy Tuesdays and more story times. So if you want that, you got to be a Patreon member. It's only $5 a month. Maybe if I get enough people on there, I can drop it to $1 a month, and then it'll probably be like the cheapest fucking Patreon you've ever paid for. What else? Oh yeah, if you become a Patreon member, you get early access to these shows, to these episodes, and you get a free coffee mug. So yeah. Also, hey, you can leave a rating and review on the website. Totally forgot to mention that. But yeah, if you want to be a Patreon member, cool. If you don't, that's cool too. I still love you just for being here. And I will be vending April 13th at Encounter Quest in Hamlet, North Carolina. So if you're in the area of Hamlet, North Carolina, please come on down, check us out. I'm going to have t-shirts, stickers, hot sauce. Come on down. It should be a phenomenal time. I'm also going to have some beer in a cooler. So if you come to my table and you listen to this, if you listen to my show, you will know that I will have beer. So say, hey, do you have a beer? And then I'll give you one. That'll be the best way for me to know if you listen to the show. Especially, well, this episode, unless I continuously say that in every beginning of every episode, which I probably won't. But I'm also vending June 8th right here in Sanford, Maine, at 40 and Fest at the gymnasium, the Memorial Gym. There we go. That's June 8th again. So if you're in the area, if you're in New England, or if you feel like traveling up here to see Maine and to see my hometown, please come on down or up, whichever way the direction is, and come check us out. I'm gonna have t-shirts, stickers, and hot sauce, man. Come on now. But yeah, no, I'm looking forward to this year, and I'm so happy that you guys are here for the ride. I appreciate every single one of you. Yeah, so again, please like, follow, share, and subscribe. Please leave a rating and review. Please spread the word about the show. I will forever be in your debt. I will also read reviews right here in the intro. So tell me what you think of the show. Like, be honest. That's all. I don't. It doesn't have to be 5 stars, man. You ain't got to give me like the sterling review. Just give me what you think. But yeah. So again, I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. So let's jump into it with Mark Steeves.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Let's get weird. Let's get weird. Let's get weird. Let's get weird. Weird. Get weird.
What's up, party people? I got a good guest here with me today. His name is Mark Steeves. He has a podcast that I really enjoy. I've been listening to it for about a year or so now. But yeah, Mark, how's it going, man?
It's going great. Nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, it's nice to have you, man. If you don't mind, for the good people that uh, don't know who you are, if you don't mind telling them who you are and what it is that you do, your podcast and all that.
My podcast is titled My Family Thinks I'm Crazy, and that's certainly true when you start getting into all this stuff in a serious way and people are like, "What are you doing spending your time lately? Do you have a real job?" And it's like, "No, I'm pursuing my interests." And yeah, this happens to be a great way to engage in this conversation, conspiracy, paranormal, history, society, where all the things overlap is kind of where I find myself often.
Yeah, man. Yeah. I will say this too. I've noticed that a lot of people will drop me from their friends list because of my conspiratorial mind. You know what I mean? It's almost like they don't want to hear it.
Well, I think it's like cognitive dissonance, like people they're comfortable believing the reality that they're in is the way it is, when you tell them something that, questions that or challenges that accepted worldview, it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So one thing that has been breaking everybody's mind lately is the whole thing in Miami at the mall there, where
Mm.
supposedly there was aliens or 10 foot or 9 foot humanoids or some shit. And I was curious what your if you've looked into that at all, and if you have any thoughts that you have on it.
I haven't looked into it. I'll just say that as far as I've heard, I mean, how could you look into something like that, right? Like, I
True.
mean, I don't live in Miami, so that's kind of step one in my opinion. But but yeah, as far as like what I've heard other people saying about it, I don't think it's anything to spend too much time on. I don't necessarily disbelieve that aliens are real, but I just doubt, that particular story. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's weird, with the police and stuff. My initial thought was like, well, if there's that much of a police response, maybe they're just worried about Florida's image, especially coming up to an election season.
Yeah.
Um, a mall is a super big place. We both know about, different events that happen, maybe planned or not, mass tragedies, we'll just say. And I don't know, maybe Florida is forward thinking enough to know, like, hey, we're going to stop anything like that from happening in our state. We don't want any mass, because as far as I know, after that one in the school there haven't been any, right? There was that one, the big one in the school. I forget the name of it, but as far as like mass tragedies go, maybe they're just trying to, you know, put a pin in it before it starts. And some kids were going buck wild with fireworks in the mall, and they overreacted, and then maybe, maybe a part of it is, hey, let's throw an alien rumor out there so this story doesn't become, look at the police overreacting to a simple, misdemeanor, right? So I think there's a lot of like subversion involved in the media that you can't really discount, especially whenever aliens come into the mix.
Absolutely, man. I agree with everything you just said. Wasn't I wasn't 100% on board. Like you said, I believe that there's definitely aliens. There's some kind out there, whether they're from outer space or they're interdimensional or they come from the ground or whatever. But I definitely think that you're right when it comes to like shootings and stuff. But I was talking to a buddy, and he was saying that they probably thought it was like a terrorist attack. Like they probably thought they were bombs, not guns or something, that which is would cause that much of police response. So I like to believe in everything that's weird. I like to believe, those kinds of stories, but um, I mean, it was fun listening to those stories that were coming out of from the people in the mall or the supposed people. because I think one of the people was like, "I'm not really from Florida. I don't even live in Florida," or something like that. I was just joking or something.
Mm.
Which, I mean, that stuff like that throws a stick in the mud too. Just people just, I don't know, capitalizing on situations to grow their channels or something, and then it comes out that they weren't being truthful or something weird like that, and it's like a grifter kind of thing, just capitalizing on a situation.
Yeah, well, and that's, unfortunately a big part of what we're involved in, not necessarily this podcast or my podcast, but just the whole idea of media and commenting on what's going on in the world. There's always going to be a bias, uh,
Yeah,
and I think it kind of borders on like dystopia when you go further up the rung of the entertainment hierarchy. You see how disconnected a lot of those people are. And that's why shows like this are more popular, whether we're on point or not when we talk about these kind of things happening in the media. I think at the very least it's authentic to some degree, right? Whereas with the media, it on that television level, that like news station level, it's edited, it's controlled. Oftentimes I'm just as unhappy with what I see on social media, like, oh, that's stupid. But
yeah,
at least people are authentically, engaging in a dialogue, and that'll lead them somewhere instead of just being told what to think or what it is. Because they may find like that engagement kind of brings upon a sense of responsibility. So maybe it'll dawn on them like, oh yeah, that post that got me 20,000 views, it was kind of stupid, or maybe not. Maybe they'll be like, oh, that post that got me 20,000 views was stupid. I better post more stupid stuff, right? So it kind of goes both ways. But I think that we are reaching a level of media connectivity globally that can be a really good thing when it's not manipulated by these powers that be.
yeah, absolutely. And speaking on, the manipulation of the media too. I don't know if you heard, but not that I'm like a Trumper or anything like that, but he just won Iowa, and I guess I think it's Rachel Maddow was out there saying she was doing her thing and talking about how they're not gonna show his victory speech at all, but if there's something in his speech that they think they should show, that's significant, that they'll pick it. So they're not allowing their viewers to, you know, essentially hear the entire speech and discern for themselves whether or not to like him. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a big racket, They're definitely trying to control who has political sway in the media, and
Mhm.
yeah, it's more transparent than ever, but it's always been that way.
Yeah, it absolutely has. And to think that it's kind of new. I mean, I think it's become a little more transparent and a little more like yeah, that's exactly what they're doing, and than it used to be, but it's always been like that. You're right. You're right. But I did want to ask you, so the show is essentially based on like, paranormal and, weird stuff, people's experiences and whatnot. So I was curious if you had any weird experiences with what you could attribute to the paranormal in any kind of way.
Yeah, I've definitely had some strange experiences. Most of them, I don't really count as paranormal because um I was either on psychedelics or high. I mean, I'm smoking weed right now. So for, those standards that some people have, I guess some of my experiences could be chalked up to like, oh, you were just hallucinating. But I don't really believe that that's even possible. I think about it in different terms, in a very personal way, that I don't need anybody to agree with, like
Yeah,
um,
yeah, I know.
it's like I've confirmed it myself, so I trust my own experience and perception. But I do feel like certain substances can heighten your perception. But then again, maybe it is hallucinatory, right? So there is that kind of catch 22 there. But I've talked to a few other people. One of them you might want to get on your show if you haven't already is Chaz of the Dead, and he has a similar approach to the paranormal where he will incorporate psychedelics into his explorations. So when I was younger, that was something I was more curious about than I am currently, and I went and I hiked to the top of this mountain, and I had a very deep spiritual experience while under the influence of acid. And, at the time, I just attributed it all to acid, but looking back on everything I've learned about and researched over the past couple years, I do think that the landscape itself played into the experience in a larger way than I initially gave credit. Because in hindsight, a lot of the experiences I had were on this mountain. And I come to find out later on that this mountain has some spiritual esoteric significance in multiple ways to multiple different cultures. So there's a mountain right outside of New Haven called West Rock, and that's where I would go. I lived in like a kind of a frat house situation, although I wasn't in the college that the frat belonged to. I was a part of this frat, and a lot of my friends from high school were in it, so it was just kind of like a hangout flop house kind of situation. So I would go there because it was comfortable, no parents, asking you what the hell you're doing. And I was only like 21, 22, so I didn't have anything better to do other than work. So when I wasn't working, I was just chilling, and I would go and hang out there. And what I didn't realize was this escape that I had on this mountain, this place that I would go just to be by myself, in the early days of New Haven's history as a colony, it was used by these judges who escaped from England because they had authorized the regicide of, I believe it was King Henry, but I could be wrong about the name of the king. But either way, this king was decapitated, King Charles, King Henry, something like that. It was around the time when the English monarchy was shaken up by um, the people who want basically like a parliament in England, right? So nowadays we have the monarchy and the parliamentary government in England. Well, this was before that. So I forget the guy's name, but he's very significant in English history. I could probably look him up right now. But when it comes to this story and why it's interesting as it relates to my little psychedelic trip, is this mountain was a place where these two judges went and escaped. And now in New Haven, um, these judges are remembered as the regicide judges, and there's two streets named after them. The streets that go towards this mountain, right? So
Okay.
they use this like kind of cave. It's not really a cave, it's more like three rocks kind of piled in a formation, and there's a little crevice in between them. They use this stone structure as shelter to hide from these redcoats that pre-revolutionary time, they were in control of Maine, Massachusetts, New York, right? They were trying to take control of Connecticut, Rhode Island, and like I think New Hampshire might have been a free colony, or might have been like half and half, kind of the same way Massachusetts and Maine were, where there were local governments, but the British government was like, no, we actually own you guys. You guys have to pay us taxes, right? And then
Right.
obviously the Boston Tea Party and all that happened, but this is before that. So in 1649, it was King Charles, and they committed him to death and then escaped to New Haven. And that rock formation that they hid in is exactly where me and my buddies would go when we were tripping. It was just like this kind of cool spot. And I remember having like this really interesting experience there where, we're like banging on the rock with sticks and, just totally out of our minds, on acid. But it felt like we were really connecting with nature, as hippy dippy as I know that sounds. But it was Edward Whaley and William Goff who signed this death warrant. They escaped, and now there's Whaley and Goff Street in New Haven. And I think, when it comes to the earth and the landscape and what's paranormal and whatnot, I think setting and background play a much larger role in these sort of experiences than we often give credit. There's a lot of attention put on the entities themselves when, you know, oftentimes the landscape that they're in is, I would argue, just as important to take into consideration. But what we had come to find is not only did these judges find refuge here, but the Native Americans had a whole stone language. And what I mean by that is there were stone structures all across North and South America. Mostly, what I've been researching is just like the northern part of North America. And just stones everywhere, right? This is a rocky territory to begin with. But there was a whole set of symbols that you would understand in this culture had, their own separate meaning depending on how they looked. So certain boulders stacked on top of each other in a certain way, a variety of small and large boulders, or a wall of boulders, small boulders piled in certain places. I mean, it goes into great lengths on the variety of types of structures, but some of the more interesting ones are the ones that are aligned with the stars, and those are the stone chambers. So there are these stone chambers all across New York, New England, Pennsylvania, and some further down south. Once when you go into Ohio and Kentucky, they start to disappear. There's not as many, but mostly concentrated between like the Great Lakes and the East Coast, right? In the northern half. And what's interesting about these is they're kind of like, I mean, they're perfect places to meditate, right? But
Absolutely.
they're almost like a portal, if you will, because what you're doing when you build one of these chambers is you're aligning it to a certain time and place, right? And every time that the stars are in that position, it's like this moment that you're creating and capturing in that stone chamber. And yeah, I mean, this might be a little bit like out of my pedigree of things that I can explain, but it's almost like this timelessness that is captured with these stone structures. So, not that I've personally done psychedelics and meditated inside one of these stone chambers, but I have felt the lure of the landscape and how someone could be pulled into that situation naturally, even without psychedelics. Because, I'm not saying that like there was a time when Native Americans were tripping out and that's why they built these chambers. I'm just saying syncretically, it's interesting that me as a modern person, without knowing anything about this Native American culture and their stone structures that are just for the most part left in the woods, not many of them are even marked by the government like, oh, this is an official historical site. Some of them are just basically just waiting there to be discovered, right? So it's to me significant that I would just kind of be drawn to that by going into the forest with that certain mindset. And I can imagine, a similar mindset would be, required to think about building something like that in the first place, whether they had psychedelics or not. There was clearly like a spiritual purpose for these things. And I kind of think it has to do with what we're seeing now with the dogmen and the Bigfoot, is that these spirits of the landscape that were once engaged with, right? This goddess energy, right? Because when you think about a stone chamber, it's kind of like a womb, right? You're going into that womb that connects with the stars, the sun, that solar energy, that male energy. It interacts with the chamber in a sexual kind of way, right? The light penetrates the chamber. And I wonder if because Americans don't have that kind of spiritual respect for nature kind of as a number one thing in their culture, maybe that's why we're seeing like Bigfoot and Dogmen, because these ceremonies aren't taking place on a mass level like they used to. I'm sure in certain tribes they still hold to their ceremonies, and not all Native Americans have been displaced from their land, but a lot of them have been. And I wonder how much that affects this, because you know, I recently, my girlfriend Tara brought this to my attention, this really excellent book called America, Nation of the Goddess. And we both just started reading it. So I don't really have much to comment on what the book actually says. But the gist of it is that there's this whole secret worship of the goddess with the Freemasons. And that's why they built Washington, D.C., the way they did with the pentagram, because the pentagram symbolizes Venus, and Venus has this connection to the goddess, obviously, and the morning star and Lucifer. And so it goes on and on and on with the symbolism there. And I'm really not qualified to get into that just yet. But I think that's kind of inherent to the whole paranormal, cryptid, and maybe even alien situation, is that something about the earth, as far as our symbiotic relationship with it, has changed. And we're, as a whole, humanity has gotten so focused on science and materialism that this like supernatural reaction is happening, because we're not on a mass level in a harmonious relationship with our sort of metaphysical world around us. Religion and spirituality used to anchor us in a harmonious relationship with that world. And now that a lot of people aren't, and I'm not saying that like, oh, the churches are bad and you're not getting connected to, no, I think any religion can do this. I think spirituality is a human thing. There's many paths to it. But I wonder if, these atheists in cities are like creating this like disharmony that's bubbling out and rippling out into the wilderness. And that's why you see even creepier stuff like Mothman and like Chupacabra, and just things that don't even really conform to uh like our natural folklore and myths, right? Because Bigfoot, hairy men, they've existed for a long time. There's tons of stories about them. Aliens, to some extent, have existed for a long time. They haven't always been called, sci-fi terms the way we do now. We didn't always think of them in a sci-fi context, but in the past, people saw aliens and things flying in the sky, angels rather, and things flying in the sky. So, not saying aliens and angels are the same thing, but you know, we have to reconceptualize our categories for what these other consciousnesses are.
Hey, you.
Yeah, you.
Are you into weird shit? Yeah?
You into cryptids?
What about hauntings? Yeah, I've got a ghost for you.
Oh, you like otherworldly beings?
Me too. Check out all these aliens. We have plenty. How do you feel about a good legend?
Want to hear about spooky happenings?
Yeah, you do.
Let us show you what we've got.
Hey guys, grab a drink and join us, Amanda and Sean, every week while we dive into the strange and haunting topics that have piqued our interest.
See you over at The Haunted and the Strange, wherever you get your podcasts.
Stay spooky.
Especially now that we know as much as we do, or maybe as much as we can, about consciousness. I think there's still so much that we don't know, and maybe there's stuff that we won't know, as far as like we can't know it. But
Right.
but I think consciousness, now that we're sort of verified in the sense that, we've come to a place scientifically where scientists are like, oh, yeah, quantum physics, we don't understand it. I think one day, maybe 30, 40, 50 years from now, those folks will realize like, oh wow, yeah, humanity got on this really weird materialist bent for like a couple hundred years, and look at all the side effects that had, and look at how, because I don't think science and religion, or science and spirituality, are even separate. I think they're the same thing. We just haven't fully understood it in the way that the ancients did, right? Because if you look at a lot of the world's ancient religions, they're far more complex than what kids and teenagers learn in school today, you know, uh, at least about the known world, right? So yeah, I think, when it comes to my own experiences, I've had moments that, you could probably best understand as synchronicities, but I think it's more than that. I think, like when you're having synchronicities happen to you, it's because you've made a sort of personal sort of statement or declaration that you're going to do something, right? And for me and my girlfriend Tara as well, it was learn more about this place that we grew up, right? This state that, you know, you're a New Englander, you get it. Like New England
Yes.
has its own character. The rest of the country doesn't really get us.
No, they don't.
They
It's
think we're either
funny.
hillbillies or uptight white people, and it's like, no, 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 no. There are both varieties of that, but there's a whole bunch of other people in between.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because, yeah, New England has also this kind of European sense to it, right? Which, with England in there, and that kind of got me really curious because, I'm a patriot. I love this country, but I also am very curious about like what happened here before. And you asked me like, about the whole Atlantis conversation that I had on Tinfoil Hat. Well, I think that, part of what a lot of us are coming to understand is that this land that we're in here in New England, maybe Europe, maybe the west coast of Africa, the Caribbean, the east coast of South America, these places were settled by a group of people that came from Atlantis. And I think the more these cultures are studied, the more evident it's going to become. I mean, some examples would be, the Native Americans here in America and all of the myths and legends that they have about thunderbirds and giants and people from different places. And I mean, it goes on and on. There's so many different tribes, there's so many different stories, and a lot of them are similar but different. There's the obvious flood myth that is in every culture, from Western to Eastern to, again, South and North American cultures have that as well. So I think what we're seeing is that there's this ancient old world that was very advanced. And I mean, who knows when that great flood is, if we can date something like that. I think scientists have dated it, and they've been able to figure out that it does line up with um, what ancients said. Like, I just had Michael Laflemme on my podcast, who talks about that in his book. And yeah, I don't remember the dates off the top of my head, but essentially they found that the Egyptians were very accurate with their description of when Atlantis fell, and they described it to Plato. Plato remembered the story, passed it on to all of Western civilization. And over the past 200-300 years, people have criticized it and said, oh, no, Plato was just making allegories. But before then, it wasn't taken as an allegory, right? When people were sailing across the Atlantic for the first time, we'll call it, but I don't think it was the first time.
Me
They
neither.
thought they thought in their minds that they were finding Atlantis, right? We get this whole story of Columbus thought he was going to India, and that's why we call the Native Americans Indians. That's not accurate at all. There's tons of different explanations for what that word actually meant, and there's tons of places that have gotten that name Indies. It's not just India. You have the Indies, Indonesia, right? Like those are all, it's all the same root word. And that Indios in Spanish means with God. So I don't know how accurate this is, but I have heard that the Spanish called the Native Americans Indios because they said these people live with God. They live in the Garden of Eden because they didn't just think they were going to find Atlantis. They thought they were going to find like the, utopia, so to speak, like but they didn't realize maybe that Atlantis had completely fell and that those people were also diaspora or the remnants of this ancient culture they had just developed on their own trajectory. That's why you see pyramids in Central America and you also see them in Egypt, right? Because both cultures left Atlantis and probably around the same time. So yeah, I think the weird stuff that we see all across North and South America has been kind of written off by the academics, anthropologists, and whatnot. They say, oh, they're just Stone Age people. They were here by themselves for 12,000 years, and all they developed was spears, and they could melt gold, but that's it. And I don't buy that. I don't necessarily think that it was like Tartaria and all that stuff that you see on TikTok, but I think maybe these giant skeletons that were pulled out of the mounds, maybe they were a huge race of people that could build giant pyramids easily. Maybe that's why after the Bible, these giants were all killed, or after what the Bible says was the flood time, right? They were all the ones that survived the flood were sought, they found them and they killed them, right? Maybe this was some kind of ancient war that has been written out of our history. And the Bigfoot that we see now roaming around North America, maybe they're like a wild version of that same race of beings, maybe not even humanoid, maybe something similar to us, but not the same Homo sapien species that we are. So I think, when it comes to the academic censorship, it leaves a lot of room for us to speculate. And I don't know if that's necessarily, going to get us to get the academics to admit that they're hiding anything. I think they're stuck in their own cognitive biases and how they think the world works. So they just say, no, that's bunk, get it out of here. And they just write it off as a hoax or people being crazy or trying to take advantage of people. When in fact, you look at a lot of these colleges and they're the ones taking advantage of people. But yeah, yeah, I kind of
I was just letting you go there, and it was all super interesting, and but like all the stuff you were saying about like connecting with nature and whatnot, dude, I'm totally there. Like I started this spiritual journey like I think in like 2020, and I feel so like at peace when I'm out in the woods. Like I'll go out and I'll just sit in my hammock in the trees and read a book, dude. It's just like it's amazing. Barefoot, just grounding with the earth and stuff. There's definitely something to it. There's definitely something to nature and us as a species. Um, and with the Atlantis thing, like they they're trying to sell this narrative of Pangea, where all of the lands were connected at one time. That's how the disperse of people that supposedly, the Native Americans came from Asia and crossed that bridge and came into the Americas, and then, the tectonic plates, or however the word is said. I might have just said it incorrectly, but and they separate and we become separate continents and stuff like that, and then that's why the
well,
Native Americans are supposedly here.
geology tells us that the whole continent splitting thing happened before humans existed. I don't necessarily buy that. I think it's possible that humans could have existed or something like humans could have existed back then, um, especially considering what Michael Leflem wrote about in his Visions of Atlantis book, some of the information about Atlantis is that it existed for like hundreds of thousands of years before, you know, our time. Like we're just a small blip compared to their entire massive civilization. And yeah, maybe these geologists are using some kind of funny math to try to make us feel like we're, you know, like to make I don't even know if it's nefarious. I think it's almost just like they're nihilistic and cynical about everything because they've been given this kind of big bang version of the world where, you know, we're all just a happy accident of chemicals in a petri dish. And that's just silly. Like once you start to really understand consciousness, it's like, well, clearly only a conscious entity could have created consciousness. You know, like if we're going to talk about a creation point, you know, that's a whole different conversation. But as
Yeah.
far as Pangea goes, I don't think it's necessarily far fetched to say that humans could have existed when all the continents were Pangea, but that's definitely not what the academics are saying. They're saying that 12,000 years ago, the Native Americans came over on a land bridge. Now, 10,000 years ago, I believe, was when the flood happened. So maybe 12,000 years ago, the land masses were larger because there was more frozen water in the caps and less ocean, right? So the sea level
Yeah.
would have been maybe 5 or 10 miles lower or more distant than it is now. Humans live on the coastline, right? If you look at a map of the world at night, all the lights are next to the water, right? And the middles of the continents are usually dark. So the same would have been true in the ancient past. They would have lived near the water, and they probably would have gotten flooded out when the sea level rose. And there probably would have been other ways other than that landmass up near Alaska and Russia for the people to come over. If the water was lower there, it was lower everywhere else. So then they would have, like I've seen maps where there was a land mass in between the Caribbean and Africa and the Mediterranean. So they wouldn't have to just sail across bare open ocean. They could just sail along the coastline of that island and then they'd be in the Caribbean from the Mediterranean. And you know they could have went the southern way or the northern way, but that nowadays is called the Sargasso Sea and the Bermuda Triangle, which tons of people go missing in the Bermuda Triangle. Maybe it's because there's a sunken continent under there with some kind of weird, you know, magnetic anomaly because they're all their machines are down there somehow. I mean, who knows? Like they could
Right.
have machines that we don't understand. Like our machines disable after they get rusty and go back into the soil. They don't work anymore. But what if they had different types of technology, like things like crystals and metals put together in a way that they don't disintegrate? Like when they get destroyed, they just fall into a pile and sit there, right? Like, you know, that could be the case where, you know, people are flying over that Bermuda Triangle, their compasses are messing up because there's some sort of weird weapon down there from ancient times that they do describe when you look at the Atlantean readings that Edgar Casey gave, or the stories that have been written about Atlantis from channelers and people who did automatic writing. You know, your academic materialist type is not going to take that as actual evidence, but then you compare that stuff with the fact that they actually were accurate in their predictions. Like, for example, Edgar Casey predicted that they would find the Bimini Road off the coast of Cuba, and he even predicted what year they would do it, and they did it in that year. And now you can go online and type in Bimini Road, and you know, again, the academics will say, "Oh, no, that's just coral. Coral can form that way, like a road." Sure, no, it's actually, you know, it's there and it defies explanation. Not to mention the entire pyramid that's underwater somewhere in Cuba, and I don't think it's an accident that these countries that have these ancient world things all end up becoming communist. Russia, China, you know, Thailand, Vietnam, like a lot of these countries that have a lot of weird stuff end up having really dictator kind of crazy governments that can just put all that stuff under wraps. Even in South America, you have communist governments, and they they won't let people look at certain things or research certain things. And so yeah, I think there's a deeper political reason to hide the origins of humanity. Maybe it has to do with keeping us in the dark about who's actually in control of the planet, about where humanity comes from, that kind of thing. But when you start looking into the paranormal cryptid alien topic, it quickly becomes a conspiracy because if it is true, why aren't they telling us about it? Why aren't they acknowledging it in encyclopedias and not just saying, "Oh, this is myth, this is folklore, this is made up," you know?
Yeah.
Beyond the Shadows podcast.
In the darkest corners of our universe lie spaces where even the light won't go.
Places where terror and the unknown lurk, always waiting.
Join Ryan and Scott on the Beyond the Shadows podcast as we pull back the curtain and peer into the darkness.
We'll examine hauntings, true crimes, mysteries, UFOs, exorcisms, reincarnations, mysteries, and all things dark.
Join us as we go beyond the shadows.
Yeah. That's dude, I think I think that it's almost like the Monsters Inc. thing where they keep us in a state of fear. Again, that's what they draw off of. And they don't want us to know exactly who we are, because if we knew exactly who we are and exactly how powerful, our vibrations all unit collectively would be higher, and our frequency, we would connect as individuals with everybody a lot better, the collective consciousness. And um I think that they are, power hungry, essentially. Like they get like a high feeling off of um the fear base. And it's just like when you get into like the flat Earth stuff, and the moon landing being fake and stuff. Like, why, if it was fake, why is it fake? And flat Earth and is probably one of the most one of the most interesting conspiracies that I find. Not that I'm a flat earther or anything. I just love listening to people talk about it. And I love listening to people talk about, Atlantis and stuff like this.
Mm.
And like these, forgotten um these like hidden history things that because history is written by the victor. The victor isn't necessarily going to be telling us the truth.
Right.
They're going to paint themselves in a good light like anybody else would. I feel like that's a part of like the human condition. Just you want people to like you know and I think it's a possibility. Now, this might be crazy. I think it's a possibility that aliens, or whatever you want to call them, however, the reptilians or whatever, I think they settled here and kind of like took over. You know what I mean? And I don't- they get that, like I was talking about, they get that fear, the fear juice, and these things become hidden. Now, is that I obviously don't have anything factual to base that off of. It's just a thought. I've seen all these like weird videos of like these people just standing and their faces just completely like contorting and almost look like lizardy, which is weird, but also could be like movie magic or whatever. Um, I mean, who knows? But I think having an open mind and being able to talk about like all these things and to feed off of each other, of people who are like-minded, is definitely a way forward too. Now, if the reptilians are real, then we have bigger problems than just, our history being hidden. I mean, they just had this big meeting too about taking things out of school, like for history. So like they're taking certain uh certain curriculums out, and it has to do with Native American history, Native American history, things, about, the artifacts, their culture and everything like that. Even the Martin Luther King Jr. book was taken out of there. So like that whole movement isn't or they wanted to. I don't know if that's like if they're already took had taken it out, but um there was this video of this board meeting, and they were talking about it, and they're like, do you realize that you're only putting, white culture into the schools, or like European cultures into the schools. We want, American culture, like, you know what I mean? It's it's weird that they want to keep things from us, and I want I the question of my entire life is why, you know, and I do I think it definitely has something with fear. So, but other than that, like I don't know, I get so lost in rabbit holes, and I'm not as like intellectual as most people. So I get lost really easy, and I get really confused, but I really love like getting listening to people talk about it. But I get turned around when I read all this stuff. But yeah, man, I the Bermuda Triangle, like you're talking about, the compass just going out of whack, and who knows? Maybe there is this ancient, weapon down there just drawing people in, and stuff like that. I would like for um it'd be super great to have like a really good, submersive machine that isn't controlled by a PlayStation controller to go down in there. That'd be phenomenal. I'd love that,
Mm.
you know. Not that I think that I'd want to be on it, but
Yeah, I was about to say that's not my cup of tea. If other people want to put a drone down there and live stream the footage, I'll watch. But yeah, I'm not going in there.
yeah, no. That's it'd be a good it'd be a freaky way to die. I feel like I don't know. I don't want to be out in the water anyway. Um but yeah, no, you're definitely hitting like the nail on the head with like the floods. I was reading up on that they think that the floods happened longer ago than they previously were thinking of it, I think.
Hmm.
And it was only off by like 1,000 years or so, or something like that. And it was the article was talking about giants, and that or no, that people lived before that's okay. This is what it was. People lived before the flood. So where are all the bones or whatever? And I'm like, wouldn't they break down though? Like, it was talking about how come we're not finding like ancient bodies, but I feel like we are finding ancient bodies. You know what I mean? Like we find them in Egypt all the time when they're doing like these archaeological digs around the pyramids and all that, and the tombs and all that stuff.
Yeah,
And
well, I mean, if something is submerged under the ocean, I'm
well,
sure
that
it's subject to different levels of decomposition depending on where it is. So like we'll find like fully intact skeletons of people from ancient times that have fallen into the bottom of a bog because in the bog there's like certain chemicals that keep all of that stuff preserved. People who, get trapped in ice. They're preserved, right? Maybe
Yeah.
even like the desert where it's dry. There's a lot of archaeological finds in places where it's very dry, but wherever there's water, things are going to decompose. And I would imagine that even bones would decompose over time in the ocean.
Yeah.
But hey, I don't know. I'm not an expert in that, and
Me
I
neither.
don't want to be put on a list for being an expert in that either.
I hear you. I hear you. It's funny too, though, because they say that so like what at the climate change, so our sea level is rising, right? But I feel like there's a lot of places where the sea level was higher at some point in history because we have um evidence that the water level was high, like the Grand Canyon was a part of the ocean at one time, is what has blah, blah, has been told to me from tour guides when I went to the Grand Canyon with my kids not too long, like 2 years ago. Like they said that this used to be filled with water. So if climate change is melting the caps and our sea level is rising, well, our sea level was high, but would that give like attribution attrib ugh, fucking A, I can't fucking talk today. Would that give some validity to like the flood where the Grand Canyon was full of water at one point? Do you think?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I'm sure. And even like the idea that California was an island not even that long ago. So,
Oh,
yeah, I mean, there are theories that California was an island like when um, the first European explorer, I forget his name, Sir Francis Drake, I think, was the first British person to do it, but
yeah.
there were Spanish sailors that came first, and the theory is that they found California and it was an island, and then there was this like earthquake and something happened, a big flood or earthquake or mud flood or something like that, and that's why that whole area is very dry now. But could have happened much longer ago. But it is pretty like apparent when you look at those dry bodies of water. Like if there was water there, then we'd like see a whole different continent. I mean, it will almost look like a giant peninsula, like Florida, instead of like a curved landmass going down. Like the what
Yeah.
is it, Baja Peninsula? I
Yeah.
believe that would have like there would have been a body of water that went straight up all the way possibly to like Oregon and Utah, like along the Rocky Mountains western side. So that all would have been water, and then it just dried out for some reason. So, I mean, desertification happens for multiple reasons. Some people think that the whole Sahara Desert was once, I mean, I don't think it's even debatable. I think they've proven that the Sahara Desert was once a giant rainforest savanna, kind of like the southern part of Africa, but something major happened and it began to dry up, and it just becomes a desert over thousands and thousands of years. And look at, you know, that part of America, the West is all dry, and a big region is super dry, right? So maybe that's uh, early stages of desertification. Who knows?
That's interesting. Yeah. Um, I didn't know that they um were considering that the Sahara was once like a rainforest. That's the first time I've heard that. Shows how much I look into deserts, you know. Um, but I want to go back to like this spot that where you and your friends used to go to. Um, where is that again? On in the mountain? What mountain is that?
What
What
did you
you
ask?
you were talking about earlier, where you went for
Oh,
your acid trips and
West Rock Mountain.
West Rock Mountain.
Yeah, in
That's
New Haven, Connecticut.
okay. All right. West Rock, New Haven, Connecticut. Now, I feel like there is definitely something to mountains. Like, do you remember the man on the mountain in New Hampshire?
Hmm.
Do you? So I was thinking, a little bit after the that face crumbled, I was kind of thinking, maybe that was like a giant, and it was just like its body fossilized or whatever,
Yeah,
and
there's the theory that that's happened. I don't know. One of the Native American legends around here is that Sleeping Giant Mountain was a giant and then died and fell where it is and became a mountain. So it's not even that's yeah, that's something that's like a common story around the country. It's not just one Native American tribe that has that kind of story. But yeah, that's the thought is that these stone structures, some mountain structures were created by giants, maybe are the bodies of giants. Maybe that's why the man on the mountain got weathered away. Maybe
that's
they
what I
wanted to
was
maybe they
thinking.
wanted to get it, they didn't preserve it for a reason, right? Because I'm sure they could have gotten some chicken wire and done something to like keep the face of it like at least stable from loose rock falling from. I don't know exactly where it was. It might have been somewhere way high up that they couldn't have managed, but I'm sure they could have done something to preserve it. But yeah, it's probably the case that, like a lot of these megalithic structures here in New England, they don't want people focusing on them. They want to give you this social justice warrior version of the Native American history, that they are all just these peace loving nature hippies that could barely, get a civilization going. They were Stone Age people, according to this school book version of history, and it's just not true. I think
Yeah.
that they had a very uh, complex knowledge of stone and how to use it, and that's why they did have stone structures. They just didn't build maybe castles the same way Europeans did. They used stone for other reasons and preferred to be more nomadic and build structures that were easily taken apart and put back together somewhere else, probably because they lived in a place that was cataclysmic. Maybe North and South America, the groups of people that are nomadic, at least in the north half of America, maybe it's because they were used to earthquakes and bad storms and hurricanes and all this different stuff that we get in America. So they're like, you know what? Living in one place isn't smart. Let's just keep it on the move. I don't know. I'm just speculating, but I think, when it comes to a lot of this stuff, whether it's the man on the mountain or the man on the moon, they're lying to us about the truth because they want to keep us in a certain box. You have a good point there with the Monsters Inc. thing. Like yeah, keep us afraid, keep us uh, on the teat of authority, and we'll just be their babes, their sheep to flock wherever they please.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I was gonna say something. Oh, um, so I'm part native from Maine, the tribe up here in Maine, Penobscot. And I kind of wish that like I had grown up like in the culture. Like cuz my aunt is very much submerged in the culture, but she has more like the best way to put it is like a liberal view of the world, you know what I mean? Um and so it's a little hard to like talk to her and get information because it's always, the whites did this to us and this and that, which not 100% incorrect. Like there's definitely something to the when the settlers came over, but like I really want to know like, significant like rituals that the tribe were involved in. Like there's so like the dancing around the fire, they call it the sacred fire, and that's the dancing was to heal, whether it's energetically or physically, or to like their way of sacrificing was sacrificing an animal. They weren't sacrificing each other or babies. And from what I've learned in from the tribe is that they basically felt like everything living had a spirit, and everything had like a certain like purpose to it that was given by their creator, aka God. um Now they weren't religious, but they believed in a one creator, which can translate into like a Christianity state where there was a God, you know what I mean? Um, and then they also have demons, which we find in the Wendigo, and there's a lot of Wendigo stories up here in the wilderness of Maine, especially like in the Mount Katahdin area. And then there's wild men, which I believe wild men stories 100%. I'm almost 100. No, I am 100% that like there's random people that just go out in the woods and want to live in the woods and live that way. Um, but I think the history that is taught to the tribes is to keep them as well as not fully understanding their full capabilities, like you were saying. Like I think they had more technology than we have been led to believe, essentially.
Yeah, and even if it's that like even if it's like a technology that we don't necessarily consider technology now, like knowledge is a technology, right? Stories
Yeah.
can be a form of technology, the truth, So yeah, I think that there's definitely an aspect to that they purposefully try to take away from indigenous people all over the planet, not just here in North America, but everywhere. And like even in places like that we don't really even respect as indigenous, like in Europe, a lot of those cultures got chewed up and spit out by the Roman Empire or the Anglican Church or whoever was the dominating force. And so yeah, it's the story all over the world, where one group of people takes advantage of another and changes their story. Maybe maybe in this organized way where they're trying to delete history, or maybe it's just like a unfortunate accident or occurrence, but I tend to think it's not an accident.
Yeah, no, it's there's way too many of the stories of where this is happening for it to be an accident. You know what I mean?
Right.
Um, l- n- just like I mean, even in Australia, they almost wiped out all the Aboriginal people down there.
Mm.
Um, for that. All right, and but yeah, so I think all this stuff is interesting. So if you believe in portals, I have a real quick story for you that before I let you go.
Tell me about
Um,
it.
so everybody that listens to the show has heard it probably 100 times. So I was 10 years old. I used to wear glasses. My sister and I, we were right here in Maine, right in Sanford, Maine. Um, and we used to pretend that we were hunting monsters and whatever. So we're out in the woods. It just snowed, so it was a very light coat, and we were following squirrel tracks, pretending they were some kind of aliens, right? And all of a sudden, like I get this like blue tint over my eye. It's like I walked into like like people put the saran wrap over the doorway, and they're like, "Hey, call your name," and you walk into it. It's kind of like that, but I didn't feel it on my face. It was only on my eyes, and it's like a blue tint. And right in front of me, like 10 maybe 15 feet, was this like little village of fucking mushroom people, and they were like 3 inches tall. They didn't look like people, they looked like mushrooms, like 100% mushrooms. There's no eyes, there's no face or anything like that. and they had like little mushroom huts, and there was like little mushroom huts going up like the sides of the trees, like making spirals and stuff like that. And I was just like, what the hell? And I get this tap on the back of my head, and my head lunges forward, and it wasn't hard, so I'm a little confused on why like my glasses fell off. Well, my glasses fell off my face, and I feel this thing on my shoulder, and I kind of like turn my head, and it's a mushroom on my shoulder, and like telepathically he goes, "You don't need those." And I go, "My glasses?" And he goes, "Yes." Like very matter of factly, just yes. And then like just like that, like a flip of a switch, because my head's turned, my sister's standing there. And then I turn my head and everything's gone. And I look back at my sister, and my sister's like, "Are you all right?" And I go, "Yeah, I just lost my glasses." She's like, "Oh my God, where?" She comes over, and I get down on my hands and knees to try and find my glasses, and she steps on them. So my mind went from I had this crazy experience to, oh my fucking God, my glasses. So I run to my house to my mother, and she's like, "I'm not gonna get you a new pair of glasses because um you have a appointment coming up. We might end up needing a new prescription anyway. So might as well just wait." And like I had blurry vision. I used to get these wicked bad headaches and stuff, but like without my glasses, that whole like a week or two seemed to be like it was lessening as like the week went up to the appointment. So we got to the appointment, and we did the tests and stuff like that, checked my eyes. And my doctor's going over all the paperwork, and he just like spins around in that little like stool chair that they used to have. I don't think I've never haven't seen them sit in one of those in like forever, but he just like spins around. He goes, "You have 20/20 vision." And I go, "What?" I mean, at 10 years old, I didn't really understand it, but I was like, "What?" And um, he's like, "Yeah, your eyes are fine." He goes, and my mom's like, "Really?" She goes, "Oh, those glasses must have helped." And I was like, "Yeah." Like not even thinking in that moment either about these mushroom people telling me I don't need glasses, you know? And yeah, and ever since then I've haven't had glasses. So
Dude, take me to the mushroom people, bro. I wear contacts. I need to take my glasses out to that mushroom village and let them knock them off my head for me. Jeez. I've heard
yeah.
a story like that before from someone else. So like
Have
you're
you?
kind of, yeah, you're kind of confirming, not like firsthand. I heard it on a podcast, but I could send you a link to that episode if I am able to track it down. But
Oh yeah,
that's
man.
not the first example of that happening. And I think when they read that story on the podcast, they were like, "Oh yeah, I've heard other stories like this where people are, kind of healed by these fairy people, particularly of vision issues," which is interesting because the another thing that usually comes along with those sightings is like that's the last time you're able to see them too, because they fix your vision and then you can't see them anymore, right? So like
Yeah.
it's almost like they're like making themselves invisible to you by giving you 20/20 vision. Like I wonder, and I think kids particularly have like a aura and an energy that attracts these beings because kids always have these kind of, more often than not, it's usually children that have those kind of sightings. But that's really cool. So did the mushroom people that you said they didn't have like many human features, but did they have arms and legs?
They
Like,
had arms, but their legs looked to be like still just the stalk. Like
okay.
you know what I mean? Like they were moving kind of like this in a
Yeah.
way,
Yeah.
like a waddle, but they
Yeah.
did have hands because they were all collecting like these little like sticks. And well, not sticks to them. They were just like these little tiny things, and they were like just stoking a fire in the middle of the village. It was really freaking interesting.
Yeah, man.
Um,
I think there's tons of those little creatures out there. There's a Native American tribe called the Mohegan tribe here in Connecticut. They have the Mohegan Sun Casino.
yeah.
Uh, their tribe recognizes a story, or they recognize a being. There's stories about these beings called the um I don't remember the name, Muksiwug, something like that. But yeah, and then Pukwudgie is another name that
Yeah.
common, and that's
Yeah.
different tribe. That's a different tribe's language for a similar being. But yeah, they have stories of these little people in the forests in Connecticut, and yeah, man, I don't think it's a coincidence that you have that kind of stuff in Europe too. They just call it like fairies and gnomes, and they have different names for them, but they're the same like little nature spirit beings that
Yeah.
children tend to run into, and I think adults with the right intentions and levity of life can see
Mhm.
these things too. It's like the very serious, like angry people who never see this kind of stuff. But hey, I
Yeah.
get pretty angry sometimes, so maybe that's why I haven't seen anything.
Maybe. I spent going off of that anger thing, I spent a good majority of my like teenage years to my young early 20s just being angry all the time and fighting people all the time. So that was a time where I never encountered anything. So that's probably why.
Maybe, yeah, vibes are important, but
Absolutely.
I had a good conversation, man. This has been
Yeah.
great. Thanks for having me on Where the Weird Ones Are, and I'd love to have you on my show to talk about, your encounter and more whatever else you got going on. I'd love to hear more about it and your
Yeah,
thoughts
man.
on, cryptids and all that.
Absolutely. I'd be down for that for sure.
Cool.
And I appreciate you coming on and taking the time too, because like time is the our most valuable currency right now. So,
Oh,
or
yeah.
has ever been. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Yeah, no problem, man. No problem. Glad to do it. And if folks liked anything that I said, I've talked about all these subjects at length on my show. My Family Thinks I'm Crazy. You can go over to my website, myfamilythinksimcrazy.com, and that'll give you all the links to, every website you can kind of engage with me on, all the podcast apps, YouTube, all the links are there.
Perfect. Perfect. All right, Mark. Well, I hope you have a good night, man. And
Thanks,
everybody
man.
listening, leave a like, follow, share, subscribe, leave a rating and review. I would appreciate it. If you decide not to, that's totally fine too, but it would warm my heart if you did so. But with that, question everything and stay weird.
This concludes our broadcast day. Click.
Because in the end, none of us have very long on this earth. Life is fleeting. And if you're ever distressed, cast your eyes to the summer sky. When the stars are strung across the velvety night, and when a shooting star streaks through the blackness, turning night into day, make a wish.